Hey guys, this is Eric Vasquez here with a brand new tutorial for you today from designcuts.com. In this tutorial, we'll be creating a fun throwback concert poster in Photoshop. To do this, we will be using some beautiful textures from Honnum Graphic Art, which is a part of the all-new Totally Vibrant Textures and Patterns bundle. Now, we all know that finding the right textures and patterns for any project can be pivotal in helping to bring a design to life. And we'll see that in this lesson when we combine some of these elements with a few free stock photos to create our retro poster. We will also be adding a fun 80s title treatment to our poster that will help push our design further using a couple of free typefaces and some useful Photoshop tricks. Even though we'll only be using a small sample from the bundle, this all-new collection boasts a massively diverse set of resources to ensure you are covered for any possible design project you will take on. So, if you're all ready to get started, then fire up Photoshop and let's begin. Now, the first thing we want to do here is create a new document that's 11 inches wide by 17 inches tall. We're going to leave the resolution set to 300, the color mode to RGB, and then we're just going to come up top here and give our new document a name. So for this, I'm going to call mine Radio Waves Retro Poster Design, but feel free to use any name that you like, and then go ahead and click Create from the bottom right corner. Now, once we create our new document here, the first thing we're going to do is click on the adjustment layer icon and add a solid color adjustment layer. Now, for the color, we can leave it set to solid black for now, and then just click OK. And once you've added this solid color adjustment layer, we're just going to drag the default background layer to the trash because we no longer need it. Now, the next thing we're going to do is come up to the File menu and choose Place Embedded to bring in our first free stock image. Now, my folders are set up a little bit differently from what you guys may have, as I've already downloaded the stock photos and fonts that we're going to be using here. But the first thing that we want to do is just make sure that we download these images and fonts to follow along. So if you guys need those, just refer to the written portion of the design tutorial where I've provided links for all of these free assets that we're going to be using in addition to the stuff from the bundle. Alright, so we're going to start with this image of the man here, and then we're just going to come down and choose Place to bring it into our document. Now, once you've brought in the image, we're going to scale it up, so I'm just going to zoom out a little bit, and then click and drag outwards while holding Alt, Option, and Shift on the keyboard from any of the four corners, and that's going to scale up the image proportionally from the center. Alright, so we want to scale it up here to make it nice and large so that the man takes up most of the canvas area here within our design. We will, of course, leave a little bit of room on the sides, but for this we just want to make sure that since he's our main subject here, that he gets a nice prominent spot in the design. Alright, so I'm just going to move him up a little bit more, maybe make it a little bit larger, not too much. And then once you're happy with the size and placement of the man in the design, we're just going to press Enter or Return on the keyboard. Now from here, hold the Alt Option key and click on the adjustment layer icon once again, and now add a new levels adjustment layer, and then click off this box that says Use Previous Layer to create clipping mask. And over here in the Properties panel, we're just going to adjust some of the contrast on the image using this levels adjustment. So all we're going to do here is move this left slider in towards the middle until it's set to around 32 or 34. And you can see already that that's just adding a nice bit of contrast there to our image. Alright, so let me just move this around here. We'll place the properties on top of our layers so I can dock that and keep that handy. And now we're going to click on that Smart Object layer again, come back down to the adjustment layer icon, and this time add a hue saturation adjustment layer. Now for this, we don't need to add a clipping mask. It'll automatically have one applied to it since it's getting sandwiched in between the image and the existing levels adjustment layer, which already has a clipping mask. So at this point, we're just going to move the hue slider down to about -75 or so. And let's go ahead and make the saturation set to around 8. Alright, so we're just going to type in -75. And you can see that that is shifting our color to more of this magenta warm tone here from the orange. Now we're going to select that top levels adjustment layer, hold Shift and select the Smart Object, press Command-Control-G to put these layers into a folder, double-click the Group 1 text and rename this folder Man. Grab the solid black adjustment layer below, put this into a folder, and we'll just call it BG for background. Now we're going to select the Man folder here and just apply a layer mask to it. Okay, and then we're going to press G on the keyboard to get our gradient tool. Now in the top here, we want to select the radial gradient, check off this box here that says reverse, And then press X on the keyboard to make sure that you have a solid black foreground color. All right, if you need to reset your default colors, just press D on the keyboard first, and then use X to toggle back and forth until you have solid black. Now, all we need to do is click and drag outwards from the center of the image, and that's going to give us a nice inverted mask here, or a nice inverted gradient, which will be applied to our mask. So by doing this, we're basically going to be fading out the corners of the image here, like so. All right, and if you want to, you can come up here, grab the linear gradient, and maybe just bring it in a little bit more from the, from the upper left corner down, or from the upper right corner down. If you wanted to bring in the edges just a little bit more. But I actually need to uncheck reverse before I do that. So make sure to uncheck the reverse box, and then you can always come in here and sort of add to the gradient that you have a little bit. I'm just going to bring it in maybe from the sides and the upper left and right corners. So now you can see down here in the layer mask that we have, everything that's being kept is white in the center, and then it just fades off and reveals the background layer below. Now let's come back up to the File menu and choose Place Embedded so that we can now select our next free stock photo here. And this time we're going to choose this light leak image, again, which you guys will find a link for in the written portion of the tutorial. And then we're just going to go ahead and choose Place. Now once you've brought the image in here, hold the Control key and click on it, and then choose the option that says Rotate 90 degrees clockwise. Now hold Control again, click one more time, and this time choose Flip Vertical. All right, now we're going to drag out from any of the four corners of the bounding box while holding Alt Option Shift until we scale it up and it fills the entire image area. Now once you've scaled it up enough, all we're going to do is just press Enter or Return to apply the changes. Now let's go ahead and change the blending mode here from normal to linear dodge, and then hold the Alt Option key, click on the adjustment layer icon, and add a new levels adjustment layer with a clipping mask applied. All right, and now we're just going to move this middle slider a bit until it's set to around maybe 0.90 or 0.94, somewhere in that range. Now select the light leak image again, return down to the adjustment layer icon, and add a hue saturation adjustment layer. Now this time we want this to be placed above our levels adjustment layer, so to do that we're going to use the keyboard shortcut Command Control and the right bracket. And that's just going to move it up one spot while retaining the clipping mask. Now here, let's go ahead and check off this box that says Colorize. And what that's going to do is sort of apply one uniform tone to the whole image. Now we'll change the hue here to about 293 and make the saturation about 83, and then bring the lightness down to about -8 or 9. All right, and now what we're going to do is select this light leak image here, the smart object layer, and we can still see some of these lines here where the change in color is happening. So what we're going to do is blur that out. So let's go up to the filter menu, choose Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we're going to give it a pretty large value. Maybe let's enter something like 340 for the radius. So it's really just going to make this really blurred and get rid of all of those lines. And now that you've done that, you can see that you have smart filters applied here. So let's select that layer, hold Shift and select the hue saturation adjustment layer on the top, press Command Control G to put it into a folder, double click and call this light leak. Now let's go ahead and return to the adjustment layer icon, scroll all the way down, and we're going to choose this option that says Gradient Map. All right, so we're going to be applying some custom gradation to this image here. So to customize the colors, you want to come into the Properties panel and click on that black and white color strip there. Now you'll see that you have this sort of strip here where you can modify colors and add as many colors as you want. Okay, so let's start with this color all the way on the left. Now we're going to click in here in this color box, and then we're going to enter the hex value 430E6C, which is this nice deep purple. And then we're going to add another color in here. And notice as I click and drag that location value is changing. So we're going to have this one set to around 29. Click on it to modify the color and enter DF09D2. Oops. DF09D2. There we go. Click OK. And now let's go ahead and enter a third color here with a location of about 55. Click to change the color value. And for this, we'll enter the hex value F190FF, all right, which is this light pink. And then we're going to come all the way to the right, choose the white color here, click on it, and now let's go ahead and change that value to our first value, which was DF0, 9D2. I'm sorry, that was our second value, not our first value. All right, so we're sort of alternating dark purple, magenta, a light pink, and then the same magenta. All right, so now let's go ahead and click OK. And we're going to change the blending mode of this gradient map to luminosity. And then that's going to give us a little bit of a foggy looking atmosphere, but let's turn it down a bit. I'm going to lower the opacity to something around maybe 40%, and that looks much better. I'm just going to press Command Control G on that adjustment layer and just call that gradient map, just so we can begin to keep things a little bit organized here as we continue to work. Now let's come back up to the File menu, choose Place Embedded once again, and now we're going to be navigating to our first freebie here from the bundle. Okay, so go to your freebies folder for this tutorial. Inside you'll find the Honnum Graphic Art subfolder. And now we're going to grab Damask Texture 3. Alright, and then once you've located that texture, just choose Place so that we can bring it into our document. Alright, now once again, let's go ahead and scale this up by dragging outwards from any of the four corners of the bounding box while holding the Alt-Option-Shift keys until it completely fills our workspace. And then from there, go ahead and press Enter or Return on the keyboard to apply those changes. Next, hold the Alt-Option key, click on the adjustment layer icon, and we're going to add another levels adjustment layer with a clipping mask applied. And now we're going to move the left slider in until it's set to somewhere around 59 or 60, just so that we can sort of crunch these the values here. We're going to make the darks even darker and the light in the image even lighter. All right, so we're going to move that slider in again until it's set to around 59 or 60, and then let's move the right slider in until it's set to around 234 or 235, somewhere about there. Now select the texture layer again, come down to the adjustment layer icon, and now we're going to add a black and white adjustment layer. And let's go ahead and move this above the levels adjustment layer by using that keyboard shortcut again, Command Control and the right bracket on the keyboard. And if you wanted to move it down, it would just be Command Control and the left bracket, which you may have guessed. Now let's select the Damask Texture Smart Object layer and change the blend mode to soft light. And we're also going to lower the opacity by pressing the number 6 on the keyboard, and that's going to bring it down to 60%. And you can see that that texture adds a nice bit of atmosphere and grit to the image already. Now with that layer selected, hold the Shift key, select the black and white adjustment layer, press Command Control G on the keyboard, and we're just going to call this Damask 3, just so we know which texture that is. Now that we have this in a folder, we can go ahead and apply another adjustment layer. So hold Alt-Option on the keyboard again, click the adjustment layer icon, and now we're going to add another levels adjustment layer. Check off this box that says Use Previous Layer to create clipping mask, click OK, and now we're going to move the left slider in and the right slider. But I just wanted to do this also to show you guys that not only can you apply these adjustment layers to individual layers, it also works well for entire group folders where you can affect everything inside of that folder. Okay, so here we're going to make it about 52, or maybe a little bit lighter. Let's go with 40 for the left slider, and we'll bring the right one in until it's set to around 195 or 196. All right, just so that we can crunch those values a little bit more. All right, and that's looking pretty good. So now let's come back up to the File menu, choose Place Embedded once again, and now we'll bring in our next stock image. So for me, I'm going to go to my Resources folder, but this is where you guys would navigate to any folder or subfolder where you're saving your images. Again, from the written portion of the tutorial, you'll be able to find those download links. And we're going to select this image, which is sort of an aerial view of a city at night, and then choose Place. Right, this is a very cool looking image, and by the time we sort of work it into our design, you won't even really be able to recognize it. So we're kind of using it as a texture here, which is pretty nice. Okay, so again, I'm going to drag outwards from any of the four corners of the bounding box to scale it up until the height at least covers my entire design. So it's going to be probably much wider than our image, but we at least want it to fill the height here so that our design is completely covered by this city image here. Okay, so now that we've scaled this up, you can click and hold the Shift key and maybe slide it to the left or slide it to the right. Doesn't really matter. We just want to get some interesting looking lights here in the background as we're going to be modifying this and creating it a bit of texture from this image. All right, so now hold the Alt Option key, come down to the adjustment layer icon, and apply a solid color adjustment layer. Again, check off the box to use this previous layer as a clipping mask and click OK. And for the fill color, let's enter the hex value 4525CF, which is this nice sort of indigo purple color here. And then we're going to change the blend mode of that layer to pin light. Okay, so that kind of has an interesting looking effect here. Now select the Smart Object layer again, return down here to the adjustment layer icon, and add a black and white adjustment layer beneath that color fill layer. All right, so that's just going to make it a little bit more uniform. Come back down and select that Smart Object layer again. And now let's return to the adjustment layer icon. And now we will add another levels adjustment. Okay, and we're just going to move the left slider in until it's set to around 40, maybe 36 is good, close enough, somewhere around the 40 range. Now we're going to select the Smart Object layer again, come up to the Filter menu and choose Blur, Motion Blur. And for this, we're going to leave the angle set to 0. Okay, so enter 0 for the angle. And then for the distance value, we're going to make that pretty high so that we can sort of get these more light streaks rather than these, very clear, sharp lights that we have in our image currently. Okay, so let's put the distance at about 244, and you can see that it's sort of just creating these streaks here. And as I increase that, it blurs it a little bit more. So let's, feel free to experiment with that a little bit, just see how it affects the image. But let's go with 244 for now, and then click OK. Select the Smart Object, hold the Shift key, select the top color fill adjustment layer, press Command-Control-G to put these layers into a folder, and we'll call this Big City Lights. Now let's just go back into that folder for a moment here and select that Smart Object again. And let's go ahead and change the blending mode of this layer so that we can see maybe to either screen or even soft light. Soft light is a pretty nice looking effect there. You can still see some of those light trails. So let's go with that. Now with that folder selected, come down to the adjustment layer icon, choose the curves adjustment layer, go ahead and create a point in the middle of the grid in the properties here. And I'm just going to move that down so that you can see the input and output values. And for the input, I want to set it to, let's say, 150. And for the output, let's go ahead and put it to 112. Okay, so that we're adding contrast over the entire image. All the layers below are being affected. Now come back down and add a levels adjustment. And here we're just going to move this left slider in until it's set to around 15 or so. Now select that top layer, hold Shift, select the curves adjustment layer below, press Command-Control-G to put these into a group folder, and we're just going to call this contrast because it's adding the contrast to our entire overall image. And then let's go ahead and maybe reduce the opacity to somewhere around 40 to 50%. Somewhere around 45 looks pretty good. I'm going to create a new layer here and then just move my properties panel to the side for a second. And I'm just going to call this layer Clouds. Okay, and then all we're going to do is make sure you have a solid black foreground color selected and then press Alt-Option-Delete to fill that layer with solid black. Come up to the Filter menu and choose Render Clouds. Okay, and that's just going to generate these sort of plain looking clouds here, but what we're going to do is press Command-Control-T to do a free transform, hold the Control key and click on the layer and then choose Rotate 90 degrees clockwise. And now we're going to scale this way up so that the clouds become larger. All right, now that we've done that, change the blend mode of the layer to overlay, and then press 7 on the keyboard to reduce the opacity to 70%. Press Command-Control-G to put this into a folder just called Clouds. Okay, so you can see now the clouds are starting to blend with some of the other textures and other images that we have layered on top. Now let's come back up to the File menu and choose Place Embedded. And we will now bring in our next freebie here from Honnum Graphic Art. So let's come back, go to Freebies into that subfolder, and this time we're going to select Texture 4, and then choose Place from the lower right-hand corner. All right, now once again we're going to scale this up by dragging outwards from any of the 4 corners while holding Alt, Option, and Shift, and then press Return on the keyboard once you have scaled that up to fill the entire image. From here, let's change the blending mode of the layer to Color Dodge. Okay, and then once you've done that, hold the Alt Option key, click on the adjustment layer icon, and now choose black and white, and check off this box here to use previous layer to create a clipping mask. Now select that top layer, hold Shift, and select the Damask Texture 4 layer below. Press Command Control G, and we're just going to put this into a group folder called Damask 4, and then let's drop the opacity down to around 60%. We don't need it to be quite so intense, but maybe 50 or 60 looks pretty good. Let's go with 60. Come back down to the adjustment layer icon, add a solid color adjustment layer to the very top, and for the fill color here, we want to enter the hex value FF7800, which is this nice warm orange color. And then we're going to change the blending mode of this layer to multiply and reduce the opacity down to about 20%. Now create another new layer just above that. Fill it with black by once again pressing Alt Option Delete when black is your foreground color. And let's rename this layer Noise. Come up to the filter menu and choose Noise, Add Noise. And here you want to make sure that you have uniform and monochromatic both checked off. And for the amount, let's crank it up to around 130, 135, somewhere in that range, and then click OK. Now, once we've added this noise here, let's go ahead and change the blending mode of this layer to screen, and then reduce the opacity to about 30%. So it's going to add a little bit of that static sort of effect to the image, and it'll help lighten this up just a little bit as well. Now we're going to select that top noise layer, hold Shift, and select the orange color adjustment layer just below, and then press Command Control G. Put this into a folder, and let's just call it something like warm noise, just so we can tell what it is right away. Now come back up to File, Place Embedded, and we're going to return to that same folder here and now select Damask Texture 8. Right, now these textures add some nice variation to our image here, just as we scale them up and play around with them. So I'm going to bring this one up nice and large to fill the canvas. And this time I'm going to change the blending mode of this layer to screen as well. Now hold the Alt Option key, click the adjustment layer icon, and add a black and white adjustment layer. Use previous layer to create a clipping mask, and then select the Smart Object layer again, return down to the adjustment layer icon, and add a Levels adjustment layer. And this time all we're going to do is move the left slider in until it's set to around maybe 100 or so, or 110. Let's go with 110 for now. That looks pretty nice. And that's just going to make it a little bit less light. You know, it's going to make it so you can still see some of that texture in there, but it still allows enough of our image below to show through. I'm going to select that top adjustment layer, hold Shift, and select the Damask Texture 8 Smart Object layer. Press Command Control G, and let's just go ahead and double click that Group 1 text and rename this folder Damask 8. Alright, so we now have our three textures in here sort of layered on top of each other with other adjustment layers and effects in between. Now with that top group folder selected, return to the adjustment layer icon, choose Solid Color, and this time let's enter the hex value FFEA00, which is this bright yellow color. Click OK, and then we're going to change the blending mode of this layer to color and reduce the opacity to about 15%, maybe 10 to 15%, and then put it into a folder and just call it Yellow Tint. Alright, it just adds almost a little bit of a sepia effect that makes it just look a little bit more aged and sort of washed out. Alright, so now that we have most of our background and our visuals set up, let's go ahead and begin working on our title treatment. So to do that, the first thing I want to do is select this Clouds group folder here, and then create a new layer. Now press X on the keyboard so that you have a solid white foreground color, and then press T on the keyboard to switch to your type tool. Now I'm going to come up to the window menu and just open my character panel here, and just move it to the opposite side, and then click somewhere around the left side of the image over here, and I'm just going to type out the word radio. Now press Command Control A to select the entire line of text, and using the character panel, I'm going to change this typeface to a free typeface called Cyberspace Raceway. And you guys can download this font for free from dafont.com. There is a download link for that in the written portion of the tutorial as well. Alright, so go ahead and install those, save them to your computer so that you can follow along. And once you've installed it and changed the typeface here, we're going to make the size around 145. And go ahead and leave the color set to white. So just leave the solid white fill color. And if your letters are really spaced out like that, just come over here and change this value as well to about 0. Let's just make it 0. Okay. And then I'll select that text layer, press Command-Control-T to do a free transform, and I'm just going to bring this over here into the center of my design. Now, the next thing we're going to do is add some layer styles here. So let's double click on that text layer, and the first one that we're going to add here is a stroke. Now, I'm going to set the size of this stroke to about 48 pixels, make sure the position is set to outside, and then use a fill color of 808024C, which is this nice dark blue color, and then click OK. And then we're going to add a gradient overlay, so come down here to add the gradient overlay, and we're going to set the scale to around 135, and then click on this color strip here to modify these colors. Now we don't really need any of these, so I'm just going to drag them down to the bottom to get rid of them so that we can start with a cleaner looking gradient here. And we'll start on the left and work our way over. So the first thing we want to do is drag this over again to move the location to somewhere around 48. And then check the color swatch here, and we're just going to make it solid white. Our second color is going to have a location of 68, and we're going to change that to the hex value A8C6F3, which is that nice light blue color. And then all the way to the right here, we're going to make our last color the hex value 220888. Okay, so it's sort of fading from white to a darker blue. All right, and then once you've done that, go ahead and click OK, and you can now sort of see what that looks like here in our text. It doesn't look like much so far, but we are going to be modifying that a little bit. Now, one thing that I want to do here that I wouldn't normally recommend is sort of stretching the text a little bit. So select that text layer and press Command-Control-T to do a free transform. And then I'm just going to drag this down just a little bit to make it a little bit taller. Not too much, but we just want it to take up a little bit more space here in the image. Now I'm going to create a new layer just above that text layer, and then press M on the keyboard to get my rectangle marquee tool. And I'm going to click and drag out a long, wide rectangle that covers basically the entire bottom half of this text here. And then once you've done that, make sure you have a solid white foreground color selected, and then press Alt-Option-Delete on the keyboard. Now press Command-Control-D to deselect all, and then double-click on the layer to add a layer style. And this time, let's go ahead and add an inner glow. Now we'll leave the blending mode here set to normal, the opacity all the way up at 100%. Make sure that you have a technique here of softer. Choose the center option for the source. The choke can be set to 0. The size we want at around 177. And then we're going to change the color of that inner glow to the hex value 1021FF, which is this cool sort of, electric blue color. All right, and you can see how that's looking there. Okay, and while we're in here, let's go ahead and change this contour box here and select the first contour shape. And then go ahead and click OK on the keyboard. From here, make sure that you have that rectangle layer selected. Come up to the filter menu and choose Distort Wave. Now for the settings here, you may have to play around with it a little bit, but I think I found some good values that we're going to use. So let's make a number of generators set to 1. The type here should be set to sine. And then under wavelength, let's make the minimum 9 and the max 372, the amplitude minimum 1 and the max 210. And then for the scale, set the horizontal to 100 and the vertical to about 41, and then press OK. Now that should give you this sort of wavy looking effect like what we have here. So now let's go ahead and add a layer mask to that rectangle layer. Press G on the keyboard to get our gradient tool, and we want a black to transparent linear gradient, and make sure that you do not have reverse checked off. And then we're going to click below the rectangle and drag upwards with our gradient tool to fade out the bottom of that shape. Now let's go ahead and press Command-Control-G to put this into a folder. Double click the group 1 text and call this wave. And from here what we want to do is hold the Command-Control key and click on the layer thumbnail icon of the radio text layer below to activate a selection around the letters. Now with your wave folder still selected, click on the Add Layer Mask icon from the bottom of the Layers palette. Now double click on the wave group folder so that we can now add some layer styles to this. What we're going to do here is add a gradient overlay, and we want to make sure that the blend mode is set to normal. The opacity is set to around 65. You can set it at linear here. The angle should be negative 136, and the scale can be set to around 135. Let's change the actual colors here in our gradient. So this time all we're going to be doing is sort of alternating between black and white. So I'm going to move that first color all the way to the left and just make it solid black. I'm going to add a second one in here that's still black. Change this third one to solid white. And then we'll make our last color here black as well. So you should sort of have something like this going on. Click OK, and if you move that out of the way, you can kind of see what's happening here. All right, you're getting this sort of gradient on top of another gradient, and it's looking pretty cool. So now let's just go ahead and click OK to apply those changes. And so far, so good. I actually want to stretch this out a little bit more, so because I already have a layer mask applied here to this wave folder, I need to click this link in between just to select that. Or, you know what, maybe even better, I'm just going to hold the Control key and choose Delete on that mask. And I'm going to grab this radio text layer and press Command Control T. And I'm just going to stretch it out a little bit more just to make it even taller. All right, somewhere around there. And then what we'll need to do is reapply that layer mask. So first, let me just move this wave down a bit. Hold the Command Control key, click on the text thumbnail icon there of the radio layer. And then with that folder still selected, add the layer mask. Okay, so now we have our text looking even taller, and that's about the right height that I think I want. Now once you're happy with the height of that text layer, press Command Control J to duplicate it, and then Command Control and the right bracket to move it above the wave folder. Hold the Control key and click on the small FX icon and choose Clear Layer Style, so we can get rid of all the layer styles on there. And then we're going to select the fill here and bring it all the way down to 0 so that it will basically be transparent. Now you can't really see anything happening here on the layer at all. But if we double click on the layer to add some layer styles, those will be visible. Alright, so let's start off by adding a stroke here. And I'm going to change the size to around 14, change the position to inside. The blend mode can be set to normal and the opacity at 100. But this time, instead of a fill type of a solid color, let's go ahead and make it a gradient. Alright, so now I'm going to change the angle of the gradient to 78, leave the scale set to 100, and now we can modify these colors. Alright, so again, I'm just going to alternate between black and white here to get sort of a shiny metallic looking effect. Alright, so we'll maybe add more of these, you would call them stops, on this bar here on the bottom. Alright, so we're going to go black, white, black, white, black, white. Add one more here. And then just kind of try to space them out sort of evenly. Alright, so you end up with something like this. And then click OK to apply the changes. Alright, so you see what we're doing there with that stroke. Now double click on that so that we can add a few more effects here. Let's go ahead and add a satin effect. Change the blend mode here to multiply. Reduce the opacity to around 39 or 40. You can leave the angle set to 90. And now we're going to enter a distance of 50 and a size of 80. And let's go ahead and also change the fill color here to the hex value 9B1313, which is this dark red color, and then click OK. Alright, and then we're also going to change the contour here. Instead of this wavy contour, we're just going to select the default one here that just looks like two triangles kind of split across the middle. Alright, and then we're also going to add a color overlay. Now for this, we'll set the blend mode of the layer to soft light. And I'm going to leave this opacity all the way up at 100, and now change the hex value to 451D4A. Alright, and then click OK. And now click OK again to apply those changes. So we've now added a few effects here on top of our previous copy of that text layer. So now let's select that layer at the very top here, press Command Control J to make a third copy, hold the Control key, click the small FX icon, and again clear the layer styles. This time we'll reduce the fill down to 0, and we're going to make the opacity, say about 42%. Okay, so we now have this third copy on top here. And then I'm going to double click on the layer to add a new set of layer styles. Now let's go to the gradient overlay here, and we'll leave it set to normal and drop the opacity down to around 36 or so. For the angle, we'll choose -18. Make the scale all the way up at 150. And then let's modify this gradient a bit. Again, just using black and white. We'll put a few stops in here. So we'll go black, white, black. Add another white stop here. Black sort of here, and then maybe one more white one all the way at the end. So you have something like this. Then click OK, and now let's add a drop shadow effect as well. Here I'll set the blend mode of the layer to multiply, 100% for the opacity. The angle can be set to 90, and then we'll bring the distance down to 0. The spread will be set to 10, and the size will be 185. And now for the fill color, let's go ahead and change that to the hex value 8C00B2, and then click OK, and click OK one more time. All right, so we now have a third sort of layer on top here. Now, what I'm going to do next is hold the Command-Control key and click on the layer thumbnail icon of this top copy of the radio text layer. Come down to the adjustment layer icon and choose solid color adjustment layer. And now let's enter the hex value FF18FC, which is this bright magenta color, and then click OK. All right, and now we have a mask automatically applied. It's sort of, just confining it to the inside of our letters here. Now hold the Command-Control key and click on that layer mask to once again activate a selection around the letters, and then come up to the Select menu and choose Modify, Contract. And we're going to enter a value of about 14 pixels, because that's how big our stroke is, and then click OK. And now select that layer mask, make sure you have a solid black foreground color, and press Alt-Option-Delete to get rid of everything inside of that selection. And now press Command-Control-D to deselect. And from here we can select that layer and change the blending mode to either, let's go with soft light for now. All right, so that just adds a bit of a magenta tint on top of our metallic stroke there on the letters. Now I'm going to add another new layer here. Press G on the keyboard once again to get my gradient tool. And this time let's go with a white to transparent radial gradient, again without having the reverse box checked off. And then we'll just go ahead and create a regular white gradient here. Press Command-Control-T to do a free transform, and let's go ahead and stretch this out to make it more of an ellipse shape. All right, so I'm just going to stretch it, kind of bring it around the bottom portion of the letters here, and then press Return or Enter on the keyboard. And then let's change the blending mode of that layer to Overlay. And now, once you've done that, hold the Command-Control key, click on the layer thumbnail icon of one of the text layers again, and then add a layer mask to that layer. So now the highlight is sort of just confined to the inside of those letters. Now if you want to modify it and move it around, simply unlink those layers, click on the layer itself, and press Command-Control-T to do a free transform, and you can now kind of move that highlight around inside of those letters there. But we essentially just want to create a nice little highlight somewhere along the bottom, even if we stretch it out to go all the way across. And then just remember to relink those layers and maybe just call it Overlay. But one thing I want to do here that we did in the previous step is to hold the Command-Control key, click on the layer mask thumbnail here, just to activate a selection around the letters, come back up to the Select menu and choose Modify Contract, once again contract it by 14. And now let's go ahead and select that mask layer that we have. And this time we actually need to invert it. So what I'm going to do instead is deselect that and just delete this layer mask. Let's back up for a second here so we can sort of, redo that part. All right, I'm going to hold the Command-Control key, click on the text layer thumbnail icon, come up to the Select menu, choose Modify, Contract by 14, and now we will add the layer mask. All right, so now the highlight isn't affecting the stroke, it's only on the inner part of those letters. All right, so that's the effect that we're going for there. Now, once you've done that, let's go ahead and select that overlay layer. Hold the Shift key and select the first copy of our radio text. Press Command-Control-G to put it into a folder, and let's call this radio text. Now, create a new layer above it. Press T on the keyboard to get your type tool. Click, and let's type out the word waves. Now, press Command-Control-A to select the entire word, and then come over to your character panel, and we're now going to change this to the other free font that we're using here called Road Rage. Now this is another free typeface from dafont.com that I've provided a link for in the written portion of the tutorial. So go ahead and check that out so you guys can follow along. Now all we're going to do here is type it out, and we're going to change the size to around 84 point with a solid white fill. All right, and then I'm going to select my move tool here, press Command Control T to do a free transform, and move it over here to the bottom right of the word radio, and then press Command Control T and maybe rotate it counterclockwise a bit, maybe around 14 or 15 degrees counterclockwise, and then press Return to apply the changes. Now let's go ahead and double click on this layer so that we can add some layer styles to it. And the first thing we're going to add here is an inner shadow layer. Alright, so if you don't see inner shadow here, come down to this effects icon in the bottom left and add inner shadow. And now let's change the blending mode of the layer to linear dodge at 100% opacity. Make sure the angle is set to 90, the distance can be set to 3, a choke of 0, and a size of about 57 pixels or so is good. And now let's go ahead and change the fill color here to the hex value FF00FC, then click OK. Add a color overlay, come down here, change the blend mode to screen at 100% opacity, and now change the hex value here to 0F75E8. Click OK. And now we're going to also add a gradient overlay set to normal at 100% opacity with an angle of, let's say, 110, a scale of 135. And now we'll click in here in the gradient to modify these colors. So I'm just going to remove a few of these so that we can start from the beginning. Select your first color all the way to the left here, and let's enter the hex value 2E008F. Click OK. We'll make our second color here with a location of around 52. And then let's change the hex value here to FF08F2. Click OK. Create a third stop here with a location of 80. And we're going to change that fill color to, let's go ahead and make that the same actually. We'll just keep that at FF08F2. And now our last color all the way on the end here on the opposite side, we're going to change to 7100D9. Click OK. Click OK again. And now we're going to add a drop shadow effect set to screen at about 71% opacity with an angle of 90, a distance of 0, a spread of 14, and a size of around 130 or 131. And then for this, we're going to change the fill color to the hex value FF28FC. Click OK. And now we're going to add one last instance of the drop shadow. So come back down here to the FX icon, add another drop shadow. And we're going to place this one below. So see this little down arrow here? We're just going to click that to move this most recent copy of the drop shadow below our previous one. And here we'll set this one to multiply at 100% opacity with an angle of 90, a distance of 0, a spread of 10, a size of 185, and we'll change the hex value here to 2E02A0. Then go ahead and click OK. And now go ahead and click OK again, and you will now see your text with all of those layer styles applied. So we just applied about 5 different effects here, which you guys can see now on our text. So now I'll press Command-Control-J to duplicate that layer, hold the Control key, click on the effects icon, and clear those layer styles, and then bring the fill back down to 0. Alright, so again, it's essentially invisible for the moment until we apply some more layer styles here. So double click on the layer. This time we're going to add an inner glow set to normal at 100% opacity with a choke of 0, a size of 21, and we'll use the fill color EB00C3. Click OK, and then click OK once again. Now here what we want to do, let's go back inside for a second. I just need to change that to edge, I believe, instead. Yep. Okay, so we just want to make sure that the source is set to edge instead of center, and everything else looks good here. So click OK, and now what we're going to do is offset this a little bit. So tap the up arrow a couple of times to offset it, and then also tap the right arrow to maybe move it just over to the right a little bit, just so you get this sort of nice layered effect like that. Now select the original copy of the waves text here, press Command Control J, and then Command Control in the left bracket to move that layer below the original copy. And we're going to once again clear the layer styles here. Double click the layer after we bring the fill down to 0 to apply some layer styles. And here we're going to apply a drop shadow set to multiply at 100% opacity with an angle of 90, a distance of 0, a spread of 10, a size of 185, and we're going to use the fill color 2E02A0. Click OK, and then click OK again. Alright, and then what we're going to do here is maybe just tap it up a little bit. Okay, and then what we're going to do here is duplicate that layer by pressing Command Control J on the keyboard. So you now have 2 copies of that shadow. Alright, so now let's go ahead and select both of those copies, press Command Control G to put them into a folder, and we'll just call that Shadows. Go ahead and add a layer mask to this folder, and switch over to your gradient tool, and grab a radial gradient that fades from solid black to transparent. And I'm just going to remove some of the shadow on the bottom here along the word waves. Alright, so we only really want it to appear between the I and the O of radio and waves here, like that. Okay, and we don't want any like weird fuzzy blue outlines here below the text. So we're just going to clean that up. And now select that shadows folder, hold the shift key, select your top copy of the waves text, press Command Control G to put this into a folder, double click the group 1 text and call this folder waves. Alright, now create another new layer, press G on the keyboard to get your gradient tool, and now we will select a white to transparent radial gradient. And all we're going to do here is click and drag outwards to sort of create our main circle here, our gradient. Change the blend mode to overlay, press Command Control J to duplicate the layer, then Command Control T to do a free transform. Click and drag out while holding Alt Option and Shift to expand it from the center. Press return and then press 5 to reduce the opacity to 50%. Duplicate that layer again, and now let's maybe make it a little bit smaller just for variation, somewhere in the middle. Alright, and then create one more copy, bring the opacity up to 100% and change the blend mode back to normal. Press Command Control T, and now reduce it by dragging inwards while holding Alt Option and Shift to make a very small sort of center here. Okay, and we've now created this sort of lens flare looking effect. So what we're going to do is select these 4 layers, press Command Control G, put it into a group folder called Flare 1, and then press Command Control T, and we can place this over maybe the upper left corner of the R here, and then we'll shrink it down a bit as well. It doesn't have to be quite so big. Now come in here into the folder and maybe resize a few of these copies just to kind of see what results you're getting. Alright, and play around with the opacity of the layers a little bit too. Alright, we just want to create a few of these sort of hot spots here. Nothing too crazy, but we just really want to make it like blow it out so it looks like a real flare. Alright, so that looks pretty good. And now what I'm going to do is select that Flare 1 folder, press Command Control J to duplicate it, Command Control T to do a free transform, and I'm going to continue sort of placing a few more copies of this around the corners and edges of the text. Alright, so just, spend a few minutes here just kind of moving it around and seeing how it affects, the letters as you move them around. Alright, maybe I'll place a copy over here on the letter D, make another copy, move it down here on the I, make another copy. Let's place this one up here on the O, maybe on the opposite side or somewhere in the middle, in that corner. Alright, and then maybe we'll go one more copy somewhere on the bottom just to mix it up a little bit. And that looks pretty good. So once you've done that, let's zoom out a little bit. Select your top flare copy, hold shift and select the original flare 1 folder, and you now have about 5 copies of your flare. So we're going to put all these into a group folder, double click the group 1 text, and call this flares. Now I'm going to select the flares folder, hold shift and select the radio text folder, press Command Control G to put these all into their own group folder, and we will just rename this TT for title treatment. Alright, so we now have all of our text layers with the flares in here. So now that we've got our title set up, let's go ahead and add a new layer below the TT group folder. Press T to get your type tool and click somewhere below the title treatment here. And we're going to go ahead and change the font in the character panel from Road Rage to Go Bold, Upload, Regular. Now this is another free font that you guys can download for free from defont.com. And it's a pretty versatile and nice looking typeface. So what we're going to do now is type out "Don't miss out," or just "Don't miss the hottest concert of the summer!" exclamation point. Press Command Control A to select the entire line of text. And we're going to change the size to maybe around 32 point, just so we can see it all. And then let's go ahead and change the fill color here to DA1 7B0, which is this nice shade of magenta. Okay, and then we're going to press Command Control T just so we can reposition this over here in the middle. And I'm actually going to go ahead and make this even smaller. Maybe around 24 point looks a little bit better. I just don't want it to, get cut off if it starts running into that magenta color on the right side. Okay, so somewhere about there looks pretty cool. Now press T to get your type tool again, click inside and come to the very end of the line and then press return on the keyboard. Now we're going to add a few more lines here for some of our acts. So I'll type out the word featuring with a semicolon, but obviously these lines are too close together. So how can we fix that? I'm going to press Command Control A to select both lines and then just increase the line spacing here, maybe somewhere around 31 or 32, just so we can see it all. Okay, and then I'm also going to make this next line a bit smaller. So maybe I'll set that to around 18 point, or say 20. And now I'm going to change the color of the word, just the word featuring here, to a different color. So let's go with the hex value 5D4CED, which is more of this light purple color. Okay, and then click after the word featuring. And now we're going to come in and type out some of the acts. So I'm just kind of making these up here. You guys can use any kind of names that you want for the bands. I'm just kind of making up a few that I put together here. Members Only, Bad Hair Day, 90 Proof, Electro Pop Kids, comma, come to a new line by pressing return. The Trapper Keepers, comma, After Midnight. And we really just need like 3 or 4 lines here. Big Bad Betty. Funny. Come to a third line. Algorithm. Ska. Humbug. Cabbage Kings. And more. Exclamation point. Now again, use the type tool to select everything after the word feature. Come to the color, and let's just go ahead and change that to solid white. Alright, so we now have a couple lines of text here with some nice color for variation. Alright, and we've got a few lines here just to break up some of this space on the bottom. Now I'm going to add another new text layer here, just below that one. And I'm going to type out tickets available now for July 1st through 14th. Press Command Control A to select the entire line of text. And let's go ahead and increase the size of that to around 32. And we'll use the same hex value that we used before for the magenta color, which was DA17B0. Alright, but let's make the date here from, let's say, July 1st through the 14th. Let's change that part to white. Press Command Control T, click, hold the Shift key, and slide this over so it's centered below the previous line of text. And if this paragraph here that you guys entered before is not centered, I should have mentioned this before, just click inside, press Command Control A, and you can either come over to your paragraph panel here or the properties and just choose center. Alright, because we want to make sure that that's all centered. And now let's see how large our first line of text is here, 24. Maybe we'll make this around 24 to match, just to see what that looks like. We may want to leave it larger, but I just like to see it for comparison. I actually like it a little bit bigger like that. Alright, but now what we want to do is come in here and select just the word, just the ST, just these two letters. Come over to your character panel here, and we're going to click on this little icon that says superscript. Alright, and that's going to make those two letters a little bit smaller. Now, there's another little box here that you guys can see that sort of adjusts the baseline. So we want to make it just a little bit higher, so let's enter a value of 2. Okay, and then we're going to do the same thing for the TH right here at the end. Click on the superscript icon and then enter a baseline shift value of 2. Alright, and we now have our second line of text in there. Now I'm just going to go ahead and create one last line here, come down to the very bottom, and for this I will type in visit www.ticketmaster.com for more information. Press Command Control A to select the whole line. And then let's go ahead and change the fill color, maybe to match that purple that we used, that sort of lavender color, which was FD4CED. Click OK. Press Command Control T. Click and hold the Shift key. And then slide this over so that it's nice and centered. Okay, and now you can kind of play around with the spacing a little bit here. I'm just going to spread these out. Maybe move this Ticketmaster line down towards the bottom. Move the tickets available line roughly in the middle there of the two. And we can even bring this down a little bit just to give our title treatment a little bit of breathing room there. Alright, now we can select all three of these layers, come up to the top toolbar here and choose Align Horizontal Centers just to make sure that they're all aligned. And now we can maybe tap it over to the right a few times while holding the Shift key just to make sure that it looks roughly centered in the design without letting that magenta sort of run into the background color there. Alright, and then at this point we'll press Command Control G to put these layers into a folder, double click the Group 1 text and rename this folder Subtext. And now we'll come back up to the File menu, choose Place Embedded, and we're going to navigate to our final free stock photo here, which is this image of the palm trees or the coconut trees, and then click Place from the lower right-hand corner. Now, once you've brought this image into your document, we want to make sure that we place it just below the Big City Lights folder, so I'm just going to reposition that in the Layers palette here. Again, just using the keyboard shortcut Command Control and the left bracket to move it down a few spots in the Layers palette, and then go ahead and change the blending mode from normal to multiply. Hold the Alt Option key and click on the adjustment layer icon and add a levels adjustment layer with a clipping mask applied. Move the left slider in until it's set to about 48 or so, and the right slider to about 225, 226. Alright, just to crunch the contrast a little bit. Select the main Smart Object layer again, return to the adjustment layer icon, and now add a black and white adjustment layer. Now we're going to place these three layers into a group folder just called Palm Tree. And now add a mask to that folder, press Command Control T, and let's go ahead and just play around a little bit with the positioning here. Right, I want to place this so some of the tree appears behind the text, maybe scale it up a little bit. Alright, just so we get hints of it sort of in the background and around the guy. Right, and there's no perfect sort of positioning for this. You just have to, kind of experiment and see what looks good. Maybe something like that. And then press Return. Now press the letter B on the keyboard to get your brush tool. And up top in the toolbar here, you want to have a soft edge brush. So hold the Shift key and tap the left bracket a couple of times to soften the edges. And then reduce the opacity to around 20 or 30%. And make sure you have a solid black fill color selected. And now what you can do is come up here and begin sort of brushing out some of these areas that you want to hide. All right, so I'm just going to brush over the man a little bit because I don't want the palm tree to come in front of him. I actually want it to look like it's behind him. So I'm going to brush out any of the hard edges, like on the bottom here where the image ends. All right, and maybe a little bit on the top here just in case there's any lines or part of the trees that we don't want. All right, and maybe just fade it a little bit more here just so it blends into the background and gives us a little bit of that atmosphere that we have going. All right, and that looks pretty good. And now let's press Command-Control-J to duplicate that folder. Hold the Control key, click on the layer mask, and choose Delete Layer Mask. Expand the contents of the group folder. And we're now going to turn off the levels adjustment here. All right, but we're going to select this whole folder, press Command-Control-T, and let's move it to the opposite side. All right, so I want to position this copy right somewhere over here. Maybe you can play with the size if you want a little bit. Maybe we'll scale it down a bit. Okay, and just position it somewhere behind the guy here. All right, that looks pretty good. Then once you're happy with the placement, press Return, add a new layer mask, and this time let's invert the layer mask. I'm going to press Command-Control-I to invert it, press B to get my brush tool, and now we're going to paint with solid white instead of black to go over the areas that we want to reveal. All right, so before we were painting out certain areas that we wanted to hide, now we're just sort of doing the opposite and using a low opacity soft edge brush to gradually bring in parts of the palm tree. All right, so you don't want to go crazy with it here. You still want to make sure that you avoid having any hard edges on the ends of the image here. All right, and we're just going to click a few times here to decide where we want the palm trees to be, paying attention to not only the placement but also the amount of contrast here in the background. Right, if you gradually bring in the contrast, it just helps to sort of put something nice in the corners there around the image. All right, and just make sure that you leave a little bit of a barrier around the man so that the palm tree doesn't run into him, and you leave a little bit of space around his body. All right, like that. Okay, and now we're going to select the very top yellow tint folder, hold the Shift key and select the BG folder on the bottom, press Command-Control-G to put all of these layers and folders into a new group folder, and we'll just call that All Layers. So we now have our completed retro concert poster design. Now we covered a lot of information in this tutorial, a lot of tips and tricks using things like masks and layer styles, and just building up a lot of texture. All right, and we have effectively created this sort of 80s retro look, which is really cool and just works well for sort of a hot summer concert poster. So I hope that you guys have enjoyed this tutorial and hopefully learned some new tips and tricks along the way. As always, we would love to see how you guys apply some of these techniques into your own work, so please go ahead and share that with us. And remember, there's still time to check out the Totally Vibrant Textures and Patterns bundle with hundreds of high-quality resources from artists such as Rule by Art, Chroma Supply, Melanie Helena, and even an exclusive pack from Design Cuts. So thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Eric Vasquez here with Design Cuts, and we'll see you next time.